Let's finish up this chapter and actually this entire semester, A&P2, with our last section here. This is section 9 of chapter 29, which is heredity. It's really interesting. It's probably one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's hard to take something like genetics and heredity and smush it into a short little 15-minute talk, because this is something that can take a semester or two to actually cover. But we'll just go through the very basics here. So first we're going to take a look at general terminology, and then we're going to talk about different types of inheritance patterns. And we'll also talk about sex-linked traits or sex-linked inheritance, and then we'll talk about how environment can influence genetic expression as well. So here's a couple of definitions here. Heredity is going to be that transmission of genetic characteristics from parent to child. And of course, the way that happens is through, of course, DNA. And that's that whole process. Remember, we talked about crossing over, genetic variation. It's really important. So genetics is the actual field studying heredity and these transmission patterns, looking to see how when that oocyte and that sperm do come together to form that child, exactly how do all of these different alleles, which we'll introduce here in a second, come together to form this new being. All right, so let's take a look at a karyotype. You guys remember this? I introduced this back whenever I talked about different types of chromosomes and homologous chromosomes, but this is going to be a karyotype. A karyotype is going to display those chromosome pairs. I was supposed to circle the whole thing, but I didn't. I'm sorry, numbers 20, 21, and 22. But it's ordered and arranged. They have all of the little chromosomes here. There's chromosome 1, and remember that is one chromosome. It might be the mom or the dad, and there's going to be the other one. It's going to be that single arm of the chromosome. And whenever they come together, they form those homologous chromosomes, which is going to be those paired chromosomes that are going to have genes for equivalent biological characteristics. So this could be for eye color, it could be for height, it could be different diseases that might be passed on from parent to child. So it's going to have basically every single characteristic on these, on all of these different chromosomes. So let's introduce this term, genes. You guys have heard of genes before. This was talked about in 2401 in that whole DNA chapter. These are going to be those discrete units of DNA that provide the instructions for the production of the different proteins. Because really the reason these different characteristics, these different biological characteristics that we have, the reason why we have them is because of some protein. The reason why we have blue eyes or brown eyes is because of a production of a protein that's given us that pigment, that different color. The reason why there's curly hair or straight hair is because of a protein that's being made. It's all about proteins being made, and genes are going to be the reason why we have specific proteins being made. So that's what those little lines are that you can see on there. Is going to be all of the different genes that you're going to have on each chromosome. So they're going to be very, very different. So some of them are going to have lots and lots of genes, like number 1 obviously is going to have lots of them. You can see how long it is, and all of the different ones on there. And then as you get lower, like tiny little 19 and 21, all of these are going to have less genes on them. And then, of course, you have your XY right there. You remember these? We talked about these sex chromosomes. Those last two are going to be the ones that specify sex. So your XX is going to be females, your XY is going to be males. All of the other ones that we just looked at are called autosomes. Those are going to be those 22 pairs of chromosomes that are going to give those somatic characteristics, again, like hair color and eye color and blood type and all of those different things. So let's introduce a couple of new terms that you might not be familiar with. You might be. I don't know which classes you've taken. But a locus is going to be a specific space where each gene is located on a chromosome. And I put this nice little picture up here. Yeah, it is going to go along with flowers. And I'll actually reference flowers a lot whenever I talk about these different types of patterns. But but you don't have to, but we'll also, of course, link it back to humans. So you can see that this one, here's homologous pair of chromosomes. This can be, you know, chromosome number 1, and this could be the mom, and this could be from the dad, whichever one. But they are coming together to form the chromosomes of this new child. The locus is going to be that shared specific space here and here on where a gene is actually located. So this could be a gene that contributes to eye color. Eye color is actually going to be multiple genes that are going to determine eye color. Now, alleles are going to be variants of one gene found at some locus on homologous chromosomes. So this is really what's going to differ if we take a look at alleles. It's an inherited combination of two alleles that are going to determine a particular trait. So again, it could be blood type. It can determine if you're AB, and it really is going to have to do with this whole dominant and recessiveness that we're about to take a look at. So this one is an allele for a purple flower. Perhaps that's a dominant trait. But this allele is actually going to have it for white flowers. Maybe that is a recessive or dominant trait. Who knows? So you could have an allele that on both of them that could be for purple flowers. It really just depends on what chromosome you got from your mom and which one did you get from your dad, and crossing over, what kind happened there. So it can all be different. So let's take a look at the alleles and the variants that we have. So that's where this whole dominant and recessive comes from. You can say dominant gene and recessive gene, or you can say dominant allele or recessive allele. It's fun. So a dominant allele is going to be one where it physically shows the trait, and the recessive trait is going to be masked. It's dominant. It's the one that if the dominant allele is going to be there, then it is going to be shown over everything else. And that one's usually expressed as a capital. So if we take a look at our example, widow's peak, then it would be, of course, our capital W here. A recessive allele is going to be expressed only if it's on both of the chromosomes. And it is typically represented by the lowercase, the tiny little w. And this is one that can skip generation. It really just has to do with how inheritance is going to occur. So the way that some patterns of inheritance is going to be figured out is through something called a Punnett square. I've heard people call it a Punnett square before. I've always called it a Punnett square. So, but this is going to be a box that shows specific gene combinations, and it's going to put together the one from both parents. So say that you and your husband thinking about having a baby, and you're wondering, I wonder if it's going to have a widow's peak. I wonder. So let's say that both of you guys have widow's peak. Now the trick here is you actually don't know your genotype. So let's take a look and see what genotype is. A genotype is going to be the genetic makeup of the individual. That is going to be that, is it homozygous dominant, or is it homozygous recessive, or is it heterozygous? So now let's introduce these terms. We know what homozygous is, right? Homozygous is going to be where you have identical alleles present. So you are going to have either two dominants, or you can have two recessive. That is called homozygous dominant. This is called homozygous recessive. Or you can have heterozygous. Heterozygous is going to be where you have one dominant and one recessive. It's called heterozygous or heterozygotes, either way. So now the problem is, again, going back to that whole process of, oh, you both have widow's peak, you wonder if your kid's going to have widow's peak. Well, the problem is that you're not sure which genotype you are, right? If you have a widow's peak, you could be heterozygous because that shows widow's peak. Remember, if you have a dominant allele anywhere, it is going to be that dominant trait that's shown. But you could also be homozygous dominant as well. Who knows? That's the trickiness. Say you did genetic testing because you were so curious whether you had a widow's peak. Honestly, I don't know if they would go through that whole process if you do genetic testing, hey, you've got a widow's peak. This is your genotype right here for widow's peak. So let's say you did and you found out both of you guys were the heterozygous. So let's take that little thing off. All right, so let's do a little Punnett square. I know it was done already on the other one, but we're going to do our own little Punnett square so you can kind of see how we do it. So while I'm doing this, let's introduce phenotype. So phenotype is going to be the physical expression of the gene. So if we go back to widow's peak, the phenotype of a widow's peak is going to be that V-shaped pattern on the hairline. So that is going to be usually the obvious thing. Sometimes it's not, like the phenotype of blood type AB. Who knows? You can't see it physically. All right, so let's say that you have figured this out. So let's put I always do mine like this. Here's the little W, and then there's a tiny W. So let's say that this is going to be the dads. And let's do the moms up here. Big and little. All right, so this goes here and this goes here. All right, so you're going to have one, so not necessarily have one child with a widow's peak. That's not what this means. We'll talk about what these means in a second. This one is also going to go all the way across here. This one goes down here. You have a heterozygote. All right, so this W goes all the way down here. And then this W goes here. I think you guys get the picture here. So doing this Punnett square, these are some things that we know. Do we know if I had 4 children exactly, how many of these children are going to have it? No, but I can tell you percentages. What are your percentages? What are your chances of having a child with a widow's peak? So if we take a look at this down here, the chances of a couple that are heterozygotes for widow's peak of having a child for widow's peak is 75%. So that's what that's saying. Their chances are greater that they are going to have a child with a widow's peak, but they do have a 25% chance that their child that's born is not going to have a widow's peak, because that's what this one is. This is homozygous recessive, meaning that there's not going to be a widow's peak. So this isn't saying, oh, I'm going to have 4 kids. Oh, 3 of them are going to have widow's peak. 1's not going to have widow's peak. Yay. No, that's not what it's saying. It's saying your chances. You could still have 4 children with widow's peak because there's a 75% chance every time that that child is going to have a widow's peak, and that's a pretty high chance. So that's what that is saying.